Okay, I think we have folks in and settled. I want to welcome everyone to the virtual Wharton Esherick Museum space. Today, I'm Emily Zilber. I'm the Director of Curatorial Affairs and Strategic Partnerships for the museum. So excited for you to join us for today's curator conversation with Laura Igoe, who I'll introduce in just a moment. I want to share first about a few upcoming virtual and in-person programs that we have coming up at the museum, which is very exciting. Today's program is one of several that we're doing in connection with Daring Design, the impact of 3 women on Wharton Esherick's craft, which is currently on view at the Michener Art Museum. Next up is a spotlight talk on the hand-printed Holzhausen curtains made for Hanna Weil on October 26th. So we'll hope you'll be inspired by what you hear today and come back and join us for that. This Sunday is the first of 3 really exciting events that we're doing called Creative Passports. We'll be having celebrations at the studio throughout the month of October and November, where over the course of the afternoon, you'll be with an intimate group of guests, treated to art making activities, behind the scenes peeks, and the chance to connect with staff here to talk through the future of the museum and look at some new archival finds. So that's really exciting. I'll also share that our call for our 28th annual juried woodworking exhibition is out. That's focused on Esherick's studio as an unconventional self-portrait. So some really nice opportunities for submission. You can find information about our upcoming virtual talks, recordings of past programs, and links to purchase tickets for the Creative Passport events on our website. We also hope that you'll come visit us now that we're open again to the public. We've just opened a new installation in our visitor center, Stories from the Archives, New Discoveries at the Wharton Esherick Museum, and Roberta Massich Artist in Residence is on view through December. With all of that goodness out of the way, I'm so pleased to welcome Laura Igoe to the museum today. Laura is the chief curator of the Michener Art Museum in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, and one of the co-curators of the exhibition Daring Design, which explores the significant impact of 3 women, Helene Fischer, Hanna Weil, and Marjorie Content, on Esherick's career and artistic development. It's a fantastic exhibition, has a beautiful little catalog, and I encourage you to go see the show, and if you can't, pick up the publication. Laura has previously held curatorial and research positions at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, Princeton University Art Museum, Harvard Art Museums, and the Barnes Foundation. She's the co-editor of A Green Country Town, Philadelphia's Ecology and the Cultural Imagination, and has contributed essays to the journals American Art, Panorama, and Commonplace, and the exhibition catalog Nature's Nation, American Art and Environment. So we're so lucky to have her with us today. We'll have about half an hour for conversation. I'll ask everyone to mute themselves if they haven't done that already. We'll then have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions and conversation at the end. Please feel free to put questions in the chat throughout, and my colleague from the Esherick Museum, Katie Wynn, will try to answer them as best we can, as will Laura and I, but if we don't, we'll get to them at the end. And so, without further ado, welcome, Laura. We're so happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Emily. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I see some familiar faces on the screen. So I'm thrilled to be here and talk about daring design and curatorial things at the Michener. It's be fun.
Fantastic. So before we get into daring design, it'd be really fun to hear a little bit more about the path that led you to the Michener. How'd you first become interested in working with American art, both as a scholar and a curator?
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen, actually, pull up some images. All right. So I became interested in American art and material culture specifically. Really, my family owns and operates an auction company for 3 generations. So my brother and his wife are currently running it now. And so I grew up surrounded by things and objects, and I was just always really fascinated by it. I mean, auction life is very fast paced, and things would kind of come in and out of the building very quickly. And when I was deciding what I wanted to study in college, I loved the opportunity to kind of slow down with objects and look more closely at them. And I've always been interested in place and understanding place through art. And that's kind of what drove my research and also dissertation project as a graduate student. So my dissertation, when I was getting my PhD at Temple University, investigated the ways that artists and architects in Philadelphia engaged with and responded to environmental change impacting the city after the Revolutionary War. And I'm showing you here just a few of my case study examples that I focused on. There's on the left is a fuel-efficient fireplace model attributed to the artists Charles Wilson and Raphael Keel. Next to that is a cross-section of the Center Square Waterworks designed by Benjamin Latrobe. You might be familiar with the Fairmount Waterworks now in Philadelphia, but the first waterworks were located where City Hall is now. Next to that is what I would argue is the most unusual example of early American portraiture, a self-portrait by the sculptor William Rush, who primarily worked in wood, but here you see him rising from a knot of a pine tree. And next to that is a relic made from the wood from Penn's treaty elm, which is reproduced in that image, which fell down in a storm in 1810. It was collected by relic collectors and made into different objects. So all this is to say that I've always been interested in place, art, and environment. And also unusual and quirky things are very appealing to me. And I tend to gravitate towards them in what I study and write and curate. Yeah, sorry, Emily, were you gonna?
Oh, no. I was gonna say, it seems it's such a nice bridge to Esherick, and that self-portrait coming out of the knot of wood. I'm gonna have to ask you for details on that later, because that is a fascinating object.
Yeah, it's made out of terracotta, and it's at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and it's typically in they have a section of in their newer building with open storage of sculpture, and it's usually on display there. But yeah, Rush had a successful career carving wooden public sculptures and ship figureheads, but also did a number of works in terracotta like this one. And it's very bizarre, but I argue is connected to the symbolism of pine at the time. It was seen as because it was such a valuable commodity. The British were trying to regulate its usage, and colonists were using it to rebel against the British by erecting these tall masts made of pine as protest symbols, and it just had all this these rich connotations that yeah, I can get into another time, but it's just a fabulous portrait.
Yeah, and so tell us a little bit about Nature's Nation.
Yeah. So I have this in here because, again, like this interest in art and environment, I worked on this exhibition that was at the Princeton University Art Museum a couple of years ago, and then traveled to the Peabody Essex Museum and Crystal Bridges Museum in Arkansas. And this was a much more comprehensive look at American art through an environmental lens, thinking about how artworks have engaged with environmental change and ideas about ecology from the colonial period to the present day. And my work on this project was really looking closely at art materials. What's the environmental history of mahogany? How does that relate to, how were people aware of that when they were consuming, purchasing and consuming mahogany chests in the 18th century, for example, and looking at different things like lead and pigments and silver. There's a lot of kind of even more interesting work to be done in that field in art history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, that's such an interesting foundation to sort of come to Daring Design or to come to Wharton Esherick with. I'm curious if you see links between the work that you did on this exhibition and how you got to Esherick.
Yeah, and I mean that's also how I got to the Michener, I guess, is right, thinking about art and environment and place. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the Michener, we specialize in Pennsylvania Impressionism and primarily landscapes painted in an impressionistic style in the early 20th century in the New Hope, Bucks County area. So I'm showing you Daniel Garber's mural, Wooded Watershed, which is one of the highlights of our collection on the left. And then, also there's a rich craft tradition too in the areas we all know. And this is built one of this is Philip Powell's door, which is always on display right across from Daniel Garber's Wooded Watershed. But yeah, I mean, I one thing I have been interested in Esherick and you know, didn't necessarily get to explore in too much depth in daring design, but was like the kind of materials that he does use. So, you know, we have for a while he would use woods that were imported from abroad, like Paduke wood, this African wood that is bright orange when you first use it and then fades over time. And Mark Sfirri, my co-curator on this project, who's a woodworker, he explained a lot of these like material, you know, properties to me, which was really fascinating. But then he also, as you all know, Esherick used a lot of woods from his own property to make some of his furniture pieces and sculpture, and also would use hammer handles to make chairs, you know, and wagon wheels, and like this idea of recycled materials too comes through in his work in a very playful way. So that was certainly appealing to me too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the exhibition. I'd love to hear
that'd be
a
great.
little more, you know, an overview of the sort of themes and goals, and a little bit about how it came to be. And you're showing a really beautiful installation shot.
Yeah, and the hammer handled chair that I was just referencing, there's one in our collection right here that was owned by Marjorie Content, one of the 3 women that we focus on too in the exhibition. Yeah, so really the impetus for this exhibition came from Mark Sfirri, who I'm sure is familiar to many of you, but you know, a well-known woodworker in the area, but also someone who's been thinking very deeply and about Esherick and researching him for some time. And soon after go ahead.
I'll just mention for folks here, we'll be doing a talk with Mark on his work on the exhibition in December, so watch our website for that.
Yeah. But soon after I started here at the museum and was thinking like, what kind of exhibitions can we do? You know, what sort of projects can I sink my teeth into? Mark was one of the first people I talked to about this idea, and he was especially intrigued with the work that Esherick did in the 30s for these 3 women. So Helene Fischer, Hanna Weil, and Marjorie Content. And this was really a period when Esherick was starting to, you know, move from sculpture and you know, woodcut prints and things like that, frame making, into furniture design. This exhibition argues that it would not have been possible without the support of these women, and not just financial support. I mean, 2 of them were very important patrons of his work, and some of the first patrons of his work, but also they really encouraged him to try new things and to think outside of the box in terms of, you know, what furniture is and can be. He really was able to think of furniture as sculpture with a purpose, and execute those pieces for these women. So it's been exciting learning more about them. I of course, at the time, you know, knew about Esherick and knew his studio and knew his work at the PMA and the Philadelphia Museum of Art, but this story was new to me, and I thought it would be new to a lot of people, even those who are familiar with Esherick. So it was interesting to think about Esherick through a lens of these women who, you know, purchased his work, commissioned his work, but also people that he made work for. They were close friends and confidants, and yeah, it's just a new aspect to this story that we wanted to explore.
We think of Esherick's story having Esherick right at the center of the narrative. Yeah. And here you're sort of decentralizing it. Esherick is one part, but it's about these relationships. And I'm, you know, curious if you can talk a little bit about what you think, what new lens came from shifting that center, from you know, bringing light onto the way that Esherick worked in collaboration with colleagues and patrons, rather than sort of just thinking about Esherick within his own context.
Yeah, so I mean, I do think there's this persistent myth, and it runs throughout art history and craft history, but as the artist, especially male artists, is this kind of hyper masculine, like solo genius. Like they've sort of come up with these ideas on their own, and we're working on their own, you know, almost in a bubble. And a lot of that is being broken down, I think, in exhibitions and scholarship and things like that. But I saw this as an opportunity, again, to kind of challenge that myth of solo creative genius, and instead thinking about, how, and also this reconnection to the market, right? Too, like that Esherick, he needed money. This was the Great Depression, and these women were, they were, providing some of that financial support for him, but also encouraging him to be creative and think of new ideas and new forms.
Mm. And so can you tell us a little bit about what about the bedrooms that we're looking at here, which
so this is a bedroom set that was made for Marjorie Content, who is a photographer, good friends with Georgia O'Keeffe and Alfred Stieglitz, who's really been overlooked in a lot of scholarship of early modernism, especially in New York. She was very tied to the avant-garde scene there. And she met Esherick through Henry Barnum Poor, ceramicist in New City, New York. She had a place in New City, New York with her husband at the time. And she, commissioned this set from Esherick for her New York City brownstone, which includes the bed and those two sets of drawers on either side, but also this vanity that you see to the right with the mirror. And then the piece above the bed is a headboard that was actually meant to be slotted into this space here, but it's recently been sort of hung almost like an artwork. But I can actually skip ahead a little bit. We can go back to some of these slides, but this is Marjorie Content here on the right, and an image of that vanity in her New York bedroom with some of the bed that you can see from one side. Here's some of her photographs. I think you can see how she's very interested in form. And we have several of these photographs in the show, and they're very small because they're, we're taken with a smaller camera, but just really beautiful, beautifully executed prints. And this is actually a find that I've discovered at the Wharton Esherick Museum in the archives, but this is on the left is a letter from Content to Esherick, where as you can see, she sketched out the vanity in her New York apartment and has all these notes about measurements and how far it sticks in the room and how some things need to be changed. And I think that's because, I'm speculating a little bit here, but I think what might have happened is Esherick made a template, maybe out of cardboard or something like that, for her to try out in the space of the wings of the vanity. And so she's writing to him her feedback based on this template, because he was known to do that, make models, of course, but also sometimes scale templates for some of his projects. And so, she's giving feedback on the design. She's involved in the process. She's not just ordering something from him. She's actively involved. And the rest of the letter goes on to talk about, like what else she wants in the room, what kind of colors she thinks the walls will be, and also, she's trying to connect him with other patrons, like so-and-so would like some patio furniture by her pool, and that kind of thing. And I also argued that Esherick might have been looking at some of Marjorie Content's photographs that she was making of the American Southwest. And this is, again, speculative, but I think this is an intriguing comparison of this canyon image on the left and the kind of undulating forms of the bedroom set on the right. Marjorie would, when she would go on these Southwest trips from New York, she would stop by Esherick's studio and would say that her journey didn't begin until she left the studio. So it was a frequent stop for her, and she would bring back Native American baskets for him. Like so he would have seen and known about these photographs essentially. So I think there's some interesting visual similarities between the work of Content and Esherick, for example, but just also some, the evidence and the letters and things that we have that show that these women were active in the design process. They weren't simply passive consumers of his designs.
Not passive consumers, creative collaborators, and then also really doing some of the work of building Esherick's business, it sounds like, which is
exactly And this is right after, this is in the Great Depression, so it's also like this money is needed by Esherick, and it's remarkable that he had this support at that time.
So I know we skipped over images, photographs of the three women. Do we want to?
Yes. Yeah, we'll go back.
Yeah.
So here they are. So we have Helene Fischer, who was a businesswoman. She was the director of the Schutte-Curting manufacturing company. And I can just show you really quick. So here she is in her study with a writing desk on the right that's not in the show, but a really important piece that Esherick designed for her. And here are some other examples of commissions by her from Esherick, including this end table with lap light is in the exhibition. The sewing cabinet is not either, but there's some discussion of it in the catalog as well. But as you can see, and I think maybe some of you, when you think of Esherick, don't think of such angular forms, but at the time, that was really what he was particularly interested in. These asymmetrical, triangular forms and shapes were pretty prevalent in his work. It wasn't until a little bit later that he starts to, be more interested in organic forms in a more like curvilinear style. But still, I mean, like very, for the time, I think just like really innovative, amazing pieces. And Hanna Weil, who's shown on the left, is connected to Esherick actually through Helene Fischer. So Helene Fischer had born in Germany, but also frequently went back to Germany to look at artwork, buy artwork, and commission artwork. And she saw some of Hanna Weil's ivory carvings on display at an exhibition in Munich and commissioned work from Hanna Weil, and eventually introduced Hanna Weil to her own son, York Fischer, and they were married for some time. But she also introduced Hanna Weil to Esherick, and Esherick went over to Germany to visit Hanna Weil. And so here you see them working together at Hanna Weil's home in Holzhausen, Germany. And then this table, which is in the exhibition, is a table that they made together along with York Fischer while he was staying there too. And it is also interesting, and there's sort of like a little bit of like a secondary story throughout the exhibition of the importance of John Schmidt, a carpenter, cabinet maker that Esherick worked with frequently, and we believe really executed these pieces. It was Esherick's designs and ideas, but Schmidt, who was really had the technical skill and ability to make them, that made these pieces possible. And actually all of these pieces are signed JS, so initials for John Schmidt. But when he's in Germany, he doesn't have access to Schmidt or the tools that he had, back at his studio in Pennsylvania. So this is a much more simplified form, but still shows this interest in geometric shapes, and kind of these interesting designs that he's incorporated into his work. Mm. And then Marjorie Content is the third patron. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Amy.
And so you have you have really wonderful representation of the work that he made in conversation and collaboration with these women in the exhibition. I'm curious if there are particular objects or stories that you were, when you were putting together the exhibition, you said, okay, we have to have this because it tells this foundational story about these relationships, and you really were hoping to be able to share them with your audiences.
Right. I mean, I was really, and I just found myself particularly drawn to Marjorie Content's photographs, and they are just like almost like gems to me. And it's just one, and they're hardly ever on view. They're not widely available at other institutions or in some public institutions, but not widely available. And so I was really excited to show those. And again, I found this, especially this letter, to be like such good evidence of the active involvement of these women in his work.
That we have wonderful archival collections at the museum. Yes. So if you are doing research, come and we love to have people come and spend some time with them.
Yeah, and sometimes you can even sit on Esherick furniture while you're doing that archival research. I mean, and these comparisons I think were really compelling to me, thinking about these two artists being united in a similar aesthetic, or thinking similarly about form and shape, and I thought was really provocative to me. And that's really, I wanted to make sure that was emphasized in the show.
Mm.
Mhm.
Are there pieces in the exhibition that feel really important to you at the moment or feel meaningful to you? Are there pieces that sort of personally resonated for you in these stories?
Yeah, I mean, I do, and I'll go back to the installation shot, but I do really, I love, I really do like the bedroom set. I mean, I think it's also a piece that has very rarely been on view. And it came from Florida, and we actually only saw it through kind of, low res photos until it arrived. And so seeing it in person was really exciting. And then also, being able to see, which fortunately we can't do in the exhibition, but seeing how the drawers open and, they kind of, it's this very smooth rotating motion that all, and, Esherick didn't like visible pulls or knobs or anything like that. So it's always very clever the way you're supposed to, usually you just reach behind a lip or something to pull these drawers opened. And the top one of this set of drawers on the left, there's a table for a telephone that kind of that opens out at the same time you open the door. So it's like this one moves clockwise, the other moves counterclockwise to open. So just seeing kind of those clever things in person is really great. And same with this vanity or dressing table. There are, and you can sort of see some of the lines here in this image, but there are drawers that actually come out too. And if it was plugged in, which it's not right now, the lights would turn on. So like there's an interior lighting system in there too. So seeing some of those details is really very special and just very like it's all those kind of details that were thought of, how things open, how things are lit. Obviously, Esherick cared very much about.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a story that gets told in the studio in spades. So it's interesting to see it resonate, to see the transition here into this more formal museum, sort of, I would say, white wall, blue wall gallery context, right?
It's true, and it's almost like they're out of their habitats, which is interesting. And a lot of these pieces that are coming from private collections and are actively used items too, which I think is also really fascinating. And we've worked really closely, not only with Esherick descendants, but also descendants of these three women as well. And it's been, you can tell that a lot of the families have been really eager to tell these stories and, have these works be on view and shared with others. And they have a real sense of pride in this project, which is, it's always, that's what you want as a curator is to, kind of, collaborate with people and have everyone feel like they're working towards, a great end goal. And seeing everything on view with them has been really great.
Were there objects that you really hoped to have in the exhibition that you weren't able to make happen?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I was so the sewing cabinet and the writing desk, I really wish, and we tried very hard to get them, but they're in a private collection, and the current owner was just not interested in lending them, despite my many pleas and and messages sent to them. But we do discuss them both in the catalog, and Mark had seen them when they were owned by a previous owner. So we had some good photographs and images of them and documentation. So they do still play a role in the exhibition, even if they're not physically there.
Well, that's that you get to have them be a part of the story, even and the story, of course, is going to live on in the catalog far longer than it's going to live on in the gallery, which will be, you have until February to rush to the Michener to see the show.
Yes. You have some time, so please do.
I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how you see the show fitting into the larger exhibitions and collections sort of goals that you have for the museum. You're thinking about the curatorial life of the museum overall, and I'm curious about where Esherick fits in the collection, and how does a show like this and the kinds of conversations that you're prompting through the show fit into your big thinking about where the institution goes moving forward.
Well, as I said earlier, I mean, we're really known for Pennsylvania Impressionist paintings. And I think people just associate that primarily with us, but we also have this rich collection of craft from the region. And I'm just showing you a few examples that have been have been on display. So that's by Frederick Harrer, who was a well-known and respected frame maker, also painter, but made a lot of frames for Pennsylvania Impressionist painters in the area. And we have this desk and chair by him on view. Of course, George Nakashima, an important artist in our collection, and Philip Powell. We saw the door earlier, but this is a fireplace surrounded by him. So Esherick really, I mean, fits in with these artists, and we actually have this comparison on view in the exhibition. So Esherick first started working in wood because he needed to make frames for paintings that he made when he was in Alabama. And he was looking towards the example of Frederick Harrer, who was a classmate of his at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. And Frederick Harrer made this frame for this Daniel Garber painting, Stockton Steeple, that's on view. And when Esherick, as you can see by this painting, like when he was at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, Impressionism was very much in vogue because of artists like Daniel Garber, who taught and exhibited work there. So there's also those like really fascinating connections between Esherick and our own core collections that I think we can really very richly illustrate.
And it sounds like you've been able to maybe uncover some of those during the research process for this exhibition.
Yes, exactly. And I'm just generally, you know, I'm as a curator, I'm very interested in helping tell stories of these understudied, you know, untold, or like, you know, not as well known artistic figures in the region that had a big impact, but they just, because of, you know, their gender or race, just didn't make the canon that we know so well today. And I see this exhibition as part of that by, you know, bringing the work of these women, you know, in conversation with Esherick. But it's also, you know, something I want to see more across the entire organization, thinking more about women artists of color in the region, and how we can, you know, amplify their work and bring them to greater, you know, public attention.
And you showed some of Marjorie Content's photographs, but in the exhibition, you also have sort of work done independently of Esherick by these.
Yes. So I'm sorry. So Marjorie Content, we have her photographs, and Hanna Weil, we have some of her ivory carvings on display, which I should have brought in images of, but I didn't today, and I apologize. But they're really fabulous. A lot of ivory work that she did for Helene Fischer, including these place card holders that are little insects and animals that are carved out of ivory. We have the full set of them on display. And Hanna Weil also she did these cut paper pieces as well. Some of those are on display too, and some of her metal work as well. Yeah, so it's great. Their work is on display too in the show.
I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about, you know, what's exciting you in your work now that Daring Design is up and running. It's, you know, for a curator, right, the work all happens before the exhibition, even though the work is visible to folks once it's up and running. I'm sure you're on to researching, on to thinking about the next project and the next artists that you want to highlight and celebrate at the Michener.
Yeah, so I mean, and also kind of, this is also linked, of course, to thinking about craft in the area, but we have been working on expanding some of our holdings in contemporary craft. And here are just some examples of ceramic work that we recently acquired. So Sid Carpenter, we had a show of her work in 2020. These are almost, I mean, these are freestanding sculptures that are almost like life-size, human size. And they're portraits of African-American farms and gardens in the South that she visited a few years ago. They're named after the farmers that care for these places. So this one is Sarah Reynolds. And she took elements of the farms and gardens that she visited and made these kind of ceramic references to them in these pieces with these really fabulous steel bases. And so we're excited to have her work on, you know, in our collection, and hope to have it out on view soon. Excuse me, hope to have it out on view again soon, because I think it's an interesting new perspective on landscape that we're not necessarily providing with our Pennsylvania Impressionist paintings, which is primarily, the white male view of the landscape. It's nice to think of, what a different perspective on land and cultivation and development through Sid's work. And then Margarita Hagen, this piece, The Beautiful Woman Has Come, was in our Rising Tides Contemporary Art in the Ecology of Water exhibition, which was what welcomed everyone back to the museum after our first COVID shutdown in 2020. And this is really gorgeous and complex work Margarita made for Rising Tides. And actually, it's an interesting COVID story because she had always planned for it to be in the exhibition, but the exhibition was supposed to open in April of 2020. And of course, that didn't happen. And so as a result, Margarita had a lot more time to work on this piece, and it just became something much more different and even more complex by the time we actually opened in July. So it has this nice tie to, our own history, this own little like snapshot in our history. But Margarita's very interested in, ocean organisms and thinking about, riffing on their forms to kind of make us more aware of issues of climate change and acidification and things like that. So this is meant to represent brain coral spawning and releasing its eggs, which happens in a synchronized time of year. And yeah, just a really remarkable piece. And then Elizabeth Stewart, who makes these almost uncanny, surreal, large sculptures of animals. And this is a recent acquisition of her work too. So all ceramic pieces, but very different, right? So I've been excited about, about this work and thinking about how we can incorporate these pieces in our permanent collection displays. We're, I think, on the brink of taking a much harder look at our permanent collection and how it's displayed and rethinking that in the future as we kind of refresh our galleries over the next few years. So it's been interesting to think about, materials and the different things that artists can do and achieve with them.
And other than telling some of these under-known stories, are there other and sort of bringing craft to the forefront, are there other things that you're thinking about and how you're going to be organizing the new galleries?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're just starting, and I think we're going to be kind of collecting a lot of community feedback too, wanting to know like what stories people want to hear about. Right now, we're thinking about posing questions to visitors over the next year around ideas of like creator, content, collector, craft, and perhaps also community. We keep adding C's. But we're like what kind of community stories can we tell through our collection? What stories about crafts can we tell through our collection? What stories about content, which to me I think is I'm particularly interested in terms of environment. Like since we have so many depictions of landscape or of the local environment, I think it'd be interesting to think more about the environmental history of some of these places and how we can bring those stories more to the fore. So yeah, those are some of the questions I guess we're thinking about and hope to be a little bit more, be a little playful and creative about it too, because it is, I mean, it's I like learning about these different aspects of objects, and I hope our visitors will as well. And then I would be remiss not to mention another exhibition that we have on view that just opened this Saturday. It's work by Miriam Carpenter, who might be familiar to some of you. I know she's done some work with the Wharton Esherick Museum before, but it's called Shaping the Ethereal, and it will be up until March. And here on the left is a really fabulous console table that Miriam only recently completed. It's in the show, and one of her, image of her working on one of her really amazing delicate feathers made of wood, which you would never believe when you see them in person. They're really inspiring. And then this is a work by her that we recently acquired as well. This is called Offering, and it's a larger feather that she carved that's also on view in the exhibition.
And I'm looking forward to heading out to the Michener to talk with Miriam as part of a panel on women in craft that will also have Mira Nakashima and Jennifer Nava-Milliken, who we recently did a curator conversation with. So For folks who are interested, November at the Michener, we'll have a chance for lots of interesting conversation, and also a chance to see the exhibition maybe before. But I really do hope that everyone who is able to has a chance to head over to the Michener's galleries and spend some time with this work. This is work by Esherick and these three collaborators, colleagues, patrons, that I don't imagine will be seen publicly again for some time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great, and we also borrowed several pieces from the Philadelphia Museum of Art for this show too. And I'm trying to think if I have any on view in these installation views I brought in. I should have just put a ton of installation views in, but I was silly and apparently
you're leaving some mystery. I'll have to
yeah, see, but this sculpture is from the PMA's collection, and this exhibition was part of a long partnership we've had with the Philadelphia Museum of Art now, where we are able to borrow work from their American art collection, and it's especially for this exhibition is work that has primarily been in storage and hasn't been on view for some time. So it's nice to have those pieces out and seen.
Absolutely, and give a new context because of the way that you formatted this exhibition. Laura, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise and your thinking about this project with us. Maybe if we can leave the slides up while we see if anyone has any questions, just in case we need them to reference. I'll encourage folks to either put questions in the chat if they have them, or feel free to unmute yourself. And we're a small enough group that just ask your question directly. And we can take it from there. But thank you so much for giving us this time today.
Of course, no, it's a lot of fun. I'm happy to take questions.
And if we don't have any right off the bat, we need to try to think about them. Oh, Kathleen Foster wants to hear, tell me some more about Schmidt.
Hi, Kathy, how are you? So John Schmidt was trained in Hungary, now Serbia, in cabinet making, and moved down the road from Esherick in the late 1920s, I believe. And then this is actually a good slide to talk about Schmidt. So this high chair here is a piece that Esherick made on his own, and it took him several years to do. He made it for initially made it for his son Peter, but I don't think finally finished it when Ruth, his daughter Ruth, would have been able to use it. And it's hard to see in these details, but he's looking at kind of arts and crafts style from Rose Valley. So it has this sort of medieval arts and crafts feel about it. And there's some kind of warping in the wood that Mark Sfirri explains to me is because he didn't quite understand how wood expands and contracts. So when John Schmidt moved down the road from Esherick started, almost apprenticing with him, and learning more skills about woodworking. And he made a cabinet that's at the Wharton Esherick Museum. I'm quoting Mark Sfirri here a lot. And so Mark will, I know he's not here now, but he'll probably listen later and be like, Laura, knock it off. But Mark describes it as almost like his journeyman's piece, because he constructed this cabinet. It's got all these different kinds of textures. He's showing off different kinds of skills in that piece. And I'm sorry, I don't have an image of it here today. But according to Mark, Esherick was like, all right, I'm not doing this. Took a lot of time. I'd rather just design. I don't want to make these things anymore. And we can debate that, I guess. But after that, there's this leap from this high chair, and only a few years later to this dining set that has this really complicated joinery, has all these. Each chair is unique and different in its angles and shapes and forms, and that's because John Schmidt was helping him execute these projects and might have really been the engineer or executor of these pieces of furniture. And so as I said, Esherick signs these pieces made for Helene Fischer in the early 1930s with JS for John Schmidt's initials. But he doesn't do that, as far as I know, for any other pieces. It's only for Helene Fischer's commissions. He doesn't sign them for Marjorie Content, but we know Schmidt spent nights at Marjorie Content's apartment, or place in New York. Some of the correspondence I saw, I guess he became very good friends with Marjorie Content's housekeeper. Like, they were still working together, but he kind of falls off in terms of, he's no longer being referenced in signatures as he was for Helene Fischer's work.
No, and it's fairly rare that we find those signatures, anything besides that WE on a piece that is connected with Esherick. So really,
and you can see it in the exhibition on the end table. You'll see the JS initials.
For those of you who can't make it to the exhibition, I would look at the Victrola cabinet that's in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, because there's a great close-up image there that shows the dual signature as a part of that. So, I mean, I hope
that was also made for Helene Fischer. Yeah.
which was also made for Helene Fischer.
Yeah, but that was new. I had not heard that story before. So that was surprising to me. I didn't realize that, Esherick wasn't making these pieces by himself.
And again, it goes against that narrative of the solo, the lone genius artist. When we often, resources are the things that help us get to a place where we can be considered that lone genius, right?
Yes.
I'm curious if there were other sort of stories that you uncovered during your research for the show that were similarly surprising, that sort of stick in your mind.
Trying to think. I mean, I've mentioned a few of them already.
And I will say, if other folks have questions, please unmute yourself and or ask in the chat. We have another minute or two for questions.
Let's see, there's something just popped up in the chat.
Oh
yeah, Igoe. I don't. my unique. Oh, sorry. This was just for me that someone had asked me about my last name, and I'm not related to Tommy Igoe, but frequently. But there are. It's actually, there's a 50-50 chance that I'm related to an Igoe that someone knows because it is so uncommon. It's my husband's name though, so it's my husband's family.
Do you have a piece that you have enjoyed, sort of, as a curator, now that this show is up and running, you get to live with these pieces, right? You get to come back and visit them and spend some time with them. Is there a piece that you've enjoyed getting to know more deeply since the show has been up that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, this end table is really fabulous, and we have a photo of the door open in the show that you can see, and in the catalog, but there you see this lip here. If you pull that open and the door kind of swings out, like it's these little like details, like seeing how things actually functioned in real life. Again, sorry, you can't open them in the exhibition.
We need some sort of white glove behind the scenes.
I know, and we talked about doing that, and we should. I know. I think that would be really wonderful. And also, I mentioned that some of these works are being continually lived with, and I always find that sort of appealing, like thinking of these things, once they go on view, we need the white gloves to touch them, but for the people who own these pieces, like this work table, for example, we could tell was actively used by its owner, and I think he even mentioned it was used as a dining table for some time, and same with this bedroom set was in the family for quite some time too. Before now it's these pieces are elsewhere. But yeah, those kinds of histories are always appealing to me. I didn't even go over these, but these are some, and I think you had a spotlight talk about these, or probably referenced these
we had a spotlight
previously
talk about Marjorie Content, but I think this is a lovely place to end, because Content had this long relationship with Esherick. They were connected for many, many years, after she relocated to Pennsylvania and sort of had this. She's a woman who had, multiple acts in her life, right? I don't know if this is the third or fourth or fifth act by the time.
This is her. She moves to Doylestown after she marries her fourth husband, Gene Toomer, an African-American writer who's associated with the Harlem Renaissance, but they moved to Doylestown really because of Esherick. They found out about the area through him. And even though she kind of, when she moves to Doylestown, she kind of becomes consumed by her husband's interests in spiritualism and philosophy, and doesn't produce as much photography, but she still is photographing friends and family, including, these images of Esherick and his son Peter on, I forget if this is Jeter or Skeeter, the horse from that's eventually placed outside of Hedgerow Theater, and
she's building
painted
furniture
bright
too.
colors. Yeah, she's building furniture too, and we don't have any of her furniture pieces in the show. I've seen some things that are still in the family, but you can tell that she was thinking about Esherick's pieces when making some of her own work as well. And actually her house, so where they lived in Doylestown, is still in the family and still includes some Esherick built-ins in that space too. So it's like if you were friends with Esherick, you just like lived with his things all the time. It's he was all of these women, it's not just furniture, but like whenever they moved to a new place, or like he would come and like help them with home upgrades and renovations, and he was very involved in his clients' lives, and developed these really important personal relationships with them too. It wasn't just work for hire, of course.
Yeah, I think that's something that we think about a lot here at the studio, the importance of Esherick's networks and connections and how they fed him, and in turn, shifted what he put out into the world, and sort of where he took his own artistic ambition. So we're so thrilled to have this really deeper exploration into this particular moment, this particular set of relationships. Again, I encourage everyone to go and see the exhibition. You have until February. So I know it's crazy that it's mid-October.
I know time is flying.
But you still have time. And Laura, thank you again for sharing your time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to be here, and thank you all for attending. I hope you'll come out and see the show. You can look on our website for our opening hours and more details, and more programs too that we're having throughout the year related to the exhibition.
We'll link to those in a follow-up email, so that'll come right to your inbox. If folks want to unmute themselves and say goodbye when we all leave this virtual space, you are welcome and invited to. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.